Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with my reading recap for the month of June 2026, and I have lots of great books to tell you about. I'm hoping that I can get through them all. We are in a heat wave here in central Ontario. It is very hot today. And I do not have air conditioning, so I am shinier than usual. Shinier than usual and quite warm. I am managing okay. I'm going to go for a swim later, putting out lots of water for the birds and all that good stuff. But despite the heat inside and the sweatiness it is inducing, I wanted to tell you about the great books I read in June. So, the first two books I'm going to talk about together, I've shown these on my channel before in the context of 2026 intention setting. And they're books that I've been reading for a while, but I finished reading them in June. So I always count the book in the month that I finished it if it takes longer than a month. And those are the two books that I've been reading about domino divination. So I read Raymond Buckland's book, Buckland's Domino Divination, Fortune Telling with Dominoes and the Games of Dominoes. This was published in 2010. And I also read a book called The Oracle of the Dominoes. And this is a book that's available on Etsy through this Etsy shop. This is written by Sam Block, who is the writer behind the excellent website, The Digital Ambler, which has tons of content on geomancy as well, and on hermeticism, and many other kind of adjacent topics. So I've been working on these domino books, and what I've been doing this month, aside from finishing the books, is creating a couple of page kind of cheat sheet, for lack of better language, for myself, to start practicing reading dominoes for myself. I've been using the different kind of keywords and explanations from each of these books in combination to make those. So they're almost done, and I'm quite pleased with them so far. So in terms of reviewing these books, this one has a lot of good information in it about different games of dominoes. It has a good index at the back. It's easy to navigate. It has some different ideas around reading dominoes and spreads, which might be appealing to tarot folks, but which is not traditional for domino reading at all. But it does have some different spreads there. It has some astrological associations. And for each domino, it has a pretty generous amount of information here. So you can see this is all about this domino here. And you get a keyword, some additional keywords, some numerology, and then this kind of multi-paragraph right up there. My critique of this book is that some of the dominoes have the same keyword as each other, which is confusing. From the standpoint of someone trying to make a chart of keywords, having some of them doubled up for completely different dominoes is not particularly beginner friendly, though reading the full descriptions and getting beyond the keywords does clearly distinguish the different dominoes. So, it's not it doesn't totally kind of nullify the value of the book or anything like that. It's just if all you're looking at is the keywords, it does have that shortcoming. Something that's cool about this book as well is that it distinguishes the dominoes by position or kind of orientation. So for example, this domino here is 5-4, but there's also an entry for 4-5, which is of course the same tile just spun around, whereas my other resource doesn't do that. It makes some comments on orientation of the dominoes here and there, but it doesn't have multiple meanings like that. So this is a cool resource for that reason. This book is excellent. I would recommend this book wholeheartedly if you want to read dominoes. It has a lot of good history and bibliography and references, including referencing Raymond Buckland in there. It has a lot of information for each domino. This is only available as a PDF file on Etsy, so I just had it printed and spiral bound at a local print and copy place. Each domino has sometimes over 3 full printer paper sized pages of information. Each domino has a keyword, or a title, really. A title more than a keyword. So for example, the 04 domino is called Stagnant Stillness. And then it has some explanation of the domino, its suit, and its weight. So like the total number of domino pips added up together is the weight. It has general indications, work and career indications, money and finances, love and romance, family and friends, health, advice and recommendations, spiritual guidance, and divinatory notes. It has that for every domino, which is really amazing. Really useful. It has some astrological correspondence material at the back. Again, maybe not the most traditional, but an area that this author, knows a lot about. And so that is interesting. It also has more, than the Buckland book does, just in terms of kind of the mechanics of reading. The number of domino tiles you might draw and how you might do that and how you might lay them out. There's a bit more in this book. So the two together have been really good for learning. I just yesterday finished a book that I got as a holiday gift from my mom, actually. And that is Imagining the Future of Climate Change, World Making Through Science Fiction and Activism. And I did have feelings reading this book about climate change, sitting on my sweltering back patio. This afternoon, our forecast is feels like 46 Celsius, which is, over 100 degrees. Feelings. This is by Shelley Strebe. I have read Shelley Strebe's work before in another book that she wrote, whose title is going to escape me in this moment, but that I liked. So this book is short, and it's about kind of the intersection between science fictional visioning and activist visioning. It particularly focuses on Indigenous and POC-led social movements, as well as science fiction works. There's a chapter in the middle on Octavia Butler and her archive, which was my favorite chapter. And yeah, I think it's good. I think it's very accessible as an academic book. I think that someone who's not from an academic background would very easily be able to make sense of this. I think that it's good in that sense. I was a little bit frustrated by it just because the emphasis was more so on explaining kind of the actions and ideas of different social movements, more so than it was on the science fiction part, I would say, kind of on the whole. And I was just kind of hoping for the opposite because I've read a ton on social movements. A lot of that material just wasn't new to me. So I had wanted, more emphasis on the science fiction. Again, it's not really a critique of the book. It's just, it did a little bit less of what I was keen to learn than what I had hoped. But overall, I thought that it was good. I also read a well-known anthology, which I kind of can't believe I haven't read before this, and that is Queer Ecologies, Sex, Nature, Politics, Desire. This is edited by Catriona Mortimer Sanderlands and Bruce Erickson, and it is a collection bringing together queer theory and environmentalism into kind of something here conceptualized as queer ecology. The introduction talks about queer ecology, and they explain, just to read briefly from the introduction by the editors here, that ideas and practices of nature, including both bodies and landscapes, are located in particular productions of sexuality, and sex is, both historically and in the present, located in particular formations of nature. The critical analysis of these locations and co-productions is what we mean by queer ecology. There is an ongoing relationship between sex and nature that exists institutionally, discursively, scientifically, spatially, politically, poetically, and ethically, and it is our task to interrogate that relationship in order to arrive at a more nuanced and effective sexual and environmental understanding. Overall, I can see why this collection has been so influential. It covers a lot of ground. It has 3 sections: Against Nature, Queer Sex, Queer Animality. That's got 4 essays in it. And then there's Green, Pink, and Public, Queering Environmental Politics. And then the last section is Desiring Nature and Queer Attachments. I really liked the first part, Queer Sex and Queer Animality, the best. There's also an essay in the second section about discourses of toxicity that I thought was really interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting collection. I will be thinking about this one for a while, and I may make some content about some ideas from this book and how it intersects with my druid practice as a queer druid. Lots to think about here. There's one essay that I thought veered very close to being transphobic. It identified the exclusion of trans people from so-called feminist spaces as an issue, but did not say enough to problematize that in my view. I think that more could have been said there. I think that some of the arguments, were more interesting or stronger than others. It is a collection that's inevitable. I do recommend this to folks who are interested in these kind of sexuality and nature, sexuality and ecology kind of conversations. I would say that having some kind of background in queer theory would be very useful to engaging with a book like this. I don't think this one would necessarily be the most readable for someone with no background whatsoever in any of the fields that are being discussed here. There's a level of, I think, knowledge presumed, which is, again, not a critique of the book, just something to be aware of. Now, moving into the fiction. I have one hard copy fiction to show you, and everything else is an ebook that I read, so I'll put them up here as usual. A book that I could not wait to get in hard copy and that I went to the bookstore on the day of the release to pick it up was Platform Decay by Martha Wells. This is the latest installment in the Murderbot series, which I fucking love. And if you haven't read Murderbot yet, go pick up book 1 immediately, because Murderbot is the best. So, Murderbot is the best. N.K. Jemison's blurb on the back of this book about the series is the most heartwarming, action-packed, literally explosive space opera I've enjoyed in a long time. Martha Wells is the best writer of lovable, snarky, gender-subversive killing machines out there. And Anne Leckie's blurb is just, I love Murderbot. So if you haven't read Murderbot, go do it. Don't start here. This is a continuous series. There's a lot of character development that is assumed to be familiar in this particular book. This one is it's Murderbot and some humans on one mission, and the mission takes up the entirety of the book. There are definitely some aspects of that mission that, in terms of how this book ends, are going to carry forward. It is a book to read in the order of the series. But I'll just read the little blurb on the inside of the book. Murderbot is back, and it doesn't appreciate your enthusiasm. Having someone else support your bad decision feels kind of good. After volunteering to run a rescue mission, Murderbot realizes that it will have to spend significant time with a bunch of humans it doesn't know, including human children. Ugh. This may well call for eye contact. Emotion check, So, in this one, Murderbot has an emotion check module that it's running, and it's quite funny. So, definitely pick this up. I went to the bookstore so quickly, to my local bookstore, that when I got there, these were still in the box in the basement. They hadn't even been put on the shelf yet. So that's how I feel about this series. Go pick it up, but don't start there. Next up, I will talk about a couple of short stories I read. I read 2 short stories by Cedar MacLeod, and for the tarot folks who are here, Cedar MacLeod, of course, is the creator of the Numinous Tarot, and the Uncertain Oracle, and the Threadbound Oracle, and their Oracle deck, the Threadbound Oracle, the characters that are depicted in that deck are also the characters of a book series that Cedar has written called the Eternal Library series. And it's an ongoing series. There are several more novels, I think, planned or in the works. And I've read a few of them. I think I've read 2 of them, and there's a third one that I have on my e-reader that I picked up, but that I haven't started yet. I read 2 short stories set in the Eternal Library series world this month. I read one called Smokey, which is about a cat and kind of human interactions with this very difficult cat. And a second one called Niren and Guinevere, and I enjoyed both. I would say definitely check out the Eternal Library series if the idea of a kind of magical, whimsical, fantastical library and magical librarians appeals to you. It is, a very queer, centering kind of book series, which I really appreciate. And that is, coming from Cedar's own perspective as a member of the community, which I also really appreciate. They're fairly cozy, not totally like without substance or anything like that. Sometimes I think cozy can be misheard as implying that it's like no stakes or something. That is not the case with this series at all. I think it would be appealing for folks who are kind of interested in like the YA adult crossover kind of feel. I really like the Eternal Library series a lot, and I enjoyed these 2 short stories quite a bit. And there are some short stories as well available on Cedar McLeod's Patreon, including at the free tier. There are some short stories there, so check that out. Next up, I read A Long and Speaking Silence by Nivo. Thank you to Tor Publishing Group for providing me this book. This is the 7th book in a series called The Singing Hills Cycle. The Singing Hills Cycle follows Cleric Chi, who is a story monk. They travel around gathering stories with their talking bird companion, whose name is Almost Brilliant, who remembers all of the stories. And I really like this series a lot. There was one title that I actually really didn't like, but the rest of the series I've really liked. And so this 7th one I was definitely going to pick up. I'm happy to hear there's going to be an 8th. A Long and Speaking Silence is sort of a prequel, I think, to some of the others, because in this book, Cleric Chi has just become a cleric from being a novice before. So they are kind of new to the role and figuring out their confidence and their boundaries and their ethics and things like this. And they are thrown into a situation where they witness, severe discrimination and hostility being directed towards displaced people. And they have to figure out how they in their role can intervene in this. It felt like a really kind of timely book in a lot of ways. I really thought it was well done. I really recommend this series. Again, this is a part of a series. It is 7th in the series, even though it is a prequel and comes kind of chronologically before some of the other books. I would not recommend starting here. I would look at the Singing Hills cycle and start at the first published book would be my personal suggestion. But I definitely recommend checking this out. I read a book called Iron Garden Sutra by A.D. Sui. Thank you, Kensington Publishing, for this book. And this is I didn't know when I got this book that this is going to be the first in a series. I read it thinking it was a standalone, but then have now seen that there's going to be, at least one sequel. I think that that's exciting. I don't know what was up with me and monks in June, but this is a book also with a protagonist who is a monk named Iris. And Iris's role as a monk has to do with giving something I would describe as kind of last rites, like laying remains to rest and this kind of thing. And Iris travels to a recently discovered generational ship. So in this world, people are living on kind of space stations and scattered around. And these generational ships were launched far before the action of this book. And every so often one is found with everyone on board having been, generally deceased for a long time. And so Iris goes to, kind of offer peace to the remains of the people who were on this ship. And when Iris gets there, there are also scientists there studying aspects of the ship and what might have happened to it. And it goes on from there. And now, I really liked this, actually. I will definitely pick up the sequel. What I will say about this book is that I'm a little bit surprised about the ways in which I feel like Iron Garden Sutra is kind of positioned in the marketing language as a kind of murder mystery and as like a locked room kind of mystery, in particular because they're on this generational ship, right? And they know who's come onto the ship and who hasn't, and so on. I did not experience it that way at all. I would call it almost like space horror, like a claustrophobic, closed setting space horror. I don't think it reads, like in terms of the conventions of a murder mystery, I don't think it reads that way at all. There's a little bit of romance, not a lot. I feel like it could have just been left out completely and the book would have been stronger for it. I don't think it was necessary. It felt like a tack on. But other than that, I liked the character development in this book. I think there's a lot of interesting themes around artificial intelligence because Iris has a kind of artificial intelligence implanted. And I think that there was some really interesting aspects of Iris navigating the tension between kind of desires and things that are religiously prescribed or prohibited. I thought that was really well done. A lot I really liked about this. I just don't think it quite is what some of the blurbs say it is, which is interesting. Which is, again, not a critique of anything other than the marketing. I quite liked the book. The next book that I will talk about is a book called Slow Gods by Claire North. Thank you to Orbit Books for providing me with an ARC to review. Slow Gods, excitingly, was just announced as one of the nominees for the Ursula Le Guin Prize. And it's so far the only one of the nominees that I have read. And I'm keen to read the others. I've read one of the authors who's nominated before, but not the specific title. And Claire North, this is not the first book by Claire North that I have read. But yeah, congratulations on that nomination. I really liked Slow Gods. Slow Gods follows a character called Ma, who is a person who is, we'll say, changed by the experience of piloting a ship through what in the book is called arc space. It's kind of like hyper fast travel. And in the context of this book, most pilots who pilot through arc space can kind of do a couple of flights and then need to be done. It's so extraordinarily mentally and physically taxing that people cannot do this long term. But somehow Ma is changed by this experience and almost, I would say, becomes godlike. Certainly not human-like. Ma becomes very long-lived and is able to transit arc space many, many times in ways that other pilots are not. And so with Ma as the main character, what this means for the book, among other things, is that the time span covered by this novel is very, very long. Many what we would think of as a kind of standard length human lifespan are covered by this book, but all following the same character who sees different societies and different cultures transform over time in pretty dramatic ways. There are a lot of different societies in this book. It is a science fiction book that includes some very much non-humanoid kinds of species that are interacting with more humanoid kinds of species. There are ways in which this almost reads like, talking about the Ursula Le Guin Prize, these kind of books that Ursula Le Guin was so wonderfully good at, like The Left Hand of Darkness, for example, where societies with very different ideas about something are kind of meeting and interacting with each other. This is not quite that. It's not a first contact book, none of that, but there are elements of this kind of cultural exchange that can be so interesting in science fiction when it's done well, and I think this is done well in this case. There are, I would say, some definite kind of environmental themes and political themes in this book. Part of the plot centers around knowing that there is going to be some events that will cause the destruction of planets that are inhabited, rendering them uninhabitable. And so how different societies are dealing with that is part of the context of this book. It's a hard one to talk about without giving too much away, but I would encourage reading the blurb and checking it out. And if it sounds interesting to you, do give it a look. I think it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Finally, the last book that I will talk about is one that I also just finished, and is, I think, the only fiction that I've read this month that isn't kind of science fiction or fantasy, and that is a collection of short stories called Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt. Billy Ray Belcourt is a excellent author, and is the author of a book called A History of My Brief Body, which is, one of the best books that I've read in the last couple of years, I would say. It's one that I picked up off the shelf at the bookstore and brought home just kind of based on, the blurb and the physical appearance of the book. I hadn't really heard of it before, and I found it absolutely captivating. Belcourt is a poet and has published books of poetry as well, which I have not read to date. He has also published another collection, I believe, a number of books anyway. And Coexistence is a series of stories that feel kind of interrelated, but are also fairly distinct. They follow Indigenous protagonists, and they cover a range of different kinds of lived experiences, characters who are dealing with grief, with love, with breakups, with loss, with identity and kind of the complexities of identity. Many of the characters, or like many of the short stories, have characters in them who are queer Indigenous people, and so there is a lot in terms of kind of navigating that lived experience of being queer and Indigenous. Some of the stories, for example, deal with characters who experience racism in the context of romantic or sexual relationships in a couple of cases, or in some cases in, professional or academic contexts, while also experiencing, the kind of intersections of queerphobia and colonialism specifically, and racism. I thought it was a really powerful collection. There were a couple of stories that I keep thinking about having finished. I feel like A History of My Brief Body is still my favorite of Billy Ray Belcourt's that I've read. I've read 3 now. But if you haven't read Billy Ray Belcourt, I would really encourage picking up whichever title sounds the most interesting to you, whether that's a poetry collection, or short story collection, maybe whatever kind of type of writing that you're most interested in reading. He is a poet, truly. And I feel like, I don't have the vocabulary to talk about poetry, I don't think, in the ways that some other folks do. I haven't studied poetry in any formal way. Poetry is not something I read a ton of, but the way that he uses language is so evocative and powerful, and on a kind of sentence by sentence level, his writing, I think, is just so special and unlike anything else that I've encountered. So I can't recommend his work enough. That is what I've read for June. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of those books that I've talked about, and what you thought of them, if so. If you've read any of these authors before, do let me know. Or alternatively, let me know what the best book that you read in June was. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.